back. Joining me now is the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, fresh from his antics on the London Underground. Your critics, Mr. Jenrick, suggest that you're just politically performing and posturing and that you didn't carry out a risk assessment before you started confronting fare dodgers in the week. What's your response to that?
Well, good morning, Camilla. Good to be back on your show. Look, I think sometimes you just got to get stuck in. You can make speeches in Parliament, you can write articles, and look, I do all of those things, but you've got to get out there and shame sometimes the authorities into action. And I was fed up, and clearly by the reaction to this video, millions of people were fed up seeing a small minority breach the rules, not paying for their fare. It makes people feel like mugs that they are. And so hopefully this will push the do-nothing Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, into taking action, getting his enforcement officers out on the London Underground and actually stopping some of these people so that we can bring down fares for everyone else.
Have you heard anything from the Mayor of London in response to this, or anyone in power at City Hall with any control over fare dodging? No.
No, well, the only thing I have heard is that they criticise me for not getting permission to go and film. So that, I think, says it all about the organisation. Look, there's obviously good people who work for TfL, but they are really led by donkeys in Sadiq Khan. We've got to get this situation fixed. And it's bigger than just this one issue, isn't it? It's graffiti on public transport. It's an obnoxious music being played by people who should be wearing headphones. It's having your mobile phone nicked. It's shoplifting. It's tradesmen having their vans broken into and their tools stolen. There's a general sense in the country right now that the public realm is being degraded, that people are not taking seriously so-called minor crimes, but ones which actually have a profound impact on people's lives. And if it takes me, as the Shadow Justice Secretary, to get out and about, I'm going to do that because I want the police and the authorities to be stepping up and taking action against each and every one of these problems.
But the public needs to be careful, don't they? I mean, I take your point particularly on loud music being played, but you don't really want to confront anybody, not least if they're young, because you wonder, in fact, when you were doing your fare dodging exercise, somebody threatened you and said that they had a knife on them. So the public have got to be careful, haven't they?
Yeah, look, I'm not asking members of the public to do what I did. It's my job to raise these issues. And some of these people are nasty people. As you say, somebody said they might have a knife amongst them when I spoke to them. What I want are the authorities to be taking action. So in the case of fare dodging, it's the enforcement officers. And when I was at Stratford Station, I saw 8 people not doing a great deal. There was even one bloke with his feet up on the counter, looking at his mobile phone when the gate was open. People were coming in and out. Probably some of them weren't paying. And, you know, on other issues, what is going on to tackle the epidemic of shoplifting right now in our country? All the phones that are being nicked out of people's hands when they're walking down the streets, and even more serious crimes than that. Look what Labour is doing on these issues. They're making it worse. They've just announced that you are barely ever going to go to prison for sentences of 12 months or less. That means thieves, burglars, thugs who beat people up are not going to go to jail. And
Let's
just
put the
to finish this point, Camilla,
counter-argument.
the NCA, the National Crime Agency, the MI5, the police have said this is going to lead to a crime wave.
OK, well, let's put the counter-narrative, and it would be this. Theresa May's Home Secretary cut police numbers, and they've never recovered. And as far as the prison system's concerned, and I know you've got some ideas as how to better protect prison officers, you speak to anyone involved in the prison estate, and they'll say that another Tory, Chris Grayling, ruined our prisons. A load of experienced prison officers were forced into retirement. Now a load of inexperienced youngsters have been recruited. And unfortunately, the lags are now in control. And this happened under Tories' rule.
Well, Camilla, you know that I am the first person to acknowledge the mistakes of the last Conservative government. I resigned from the Cabinet because I thought it was completely wrong that Rishi Sunak wouldn't take my advice on stopping the boats and wouldn't go further to bring down legal migration. But I am now the Shadow Justice Secretary. I'm interested in the present and the future and in what we can do to make this country a better place. And on prisons, I'm really worried that there is a mounting issue about prison officer safety and, in particular, Islamist gangs and terrorists in our prisons. I'm warning today that unless the government takes action, it is only a matter of time before a prison officer is held hostage and, God forbid, is actually killed. That's why I've commissioned Ian Aitchison, one of the most respected former prison governors in our country, to bring forward recommendations that I'm giving to the government today. They have to act now. And I'm saying, let's have the backs of those brave prison officers. Let's properly equip them so that specialist officers in our maximum security jails have lethal weapons. So if, God forbid, a prisoner has a gun, they can take action and regain control of that jail as quickly as possible. And every day, let's make sure those officers have high-collar stab vests. It's totally wrong that they don't have that. These are brave men and women doing a tough job, and I want them to be properly protected.
But if you're talking about prison officers carrying guns, what if the inmates do take control of the prison? What if the inmates do overpower prison officers and then the inmates are armed?
Well, we're talking here about specialist trained officers in maximum security jails, using these in the most difficult situations, going to a secure armoury, getting them so they can respond rapidly and regain control of the prison. Today, prison officers do go in with guns in these situations, but they have to call for backup to come to the prison. And that can take hours. Some of these maximum security jails, like Long Lartin in Worcestershire, are in very rural locations. I'm not prepared for our prison officers to be left in that situation. And Charlie Taylor, the Chief Inspector of Prisons, he warned at the beginning of the year this exact situation could happen. He said that drones could be used so that guns get into prisons and get into the hands of these dangerous prisoners and these Islamist terrorists that are now in our jails. And something very similar to that happened this week. It is alleged that a terrorist got hold of a knife brought in by a drone into Long Lartin prison and used that to stab a prison officer. So this is already happening. We saw Axel Rudakabana, the Southport killer. He allegedly attacked a prison officer. We saw Hashim Abedi, one of the terrorists who plotted the Manchester Arena bombing. He allegedly attacked a prison officer. This is getting worse and worse and worse. Enough is enough. Let's have the backs of these brave officers.
All right. But it probably could have been predicted that Islamist extremism was going to become an increasing problem in Britain's prisons. And yet, under the Conservatives, you only created 28 isolation places for radical prisoners. That, in retrospect, was a grave mistake.
Well, we did create the separation centres, as you say.
But not
and
enough.
In fact, Ian Aitchison, who's written the report for me today, was the author of that policy. But we should have done more. You're absolutely right. We should have done more. Look, what we could do now is focus on the future. And the problem is getting significantly worse as there are more terror suspects, or more terrorists, not suspects, more convicted terrorists in our prisons today. At the moment, there are only 3 of these separation centres. One is closed. So there are precious few of these settings. What I want to do is restore solitary confinement. Let it mean solitary confinement, Camilla, not some kind of holiday camp where you have access to a kettle that you could boil water and use to attack a prisoner. I don't want there to be any privileges. We read in the papers this weekend that Axel Rudakabana is able to buy Maltesers and Haribo. This is pathetic. What would the victims of his crimes think about that? And certainly what would the prison officers think? I want these people to be in solitary confinement. I want the radicalising imams to be out of our prisons. Let's make sure all these people are properly security checked before they're let anywhere near these dangerous individuals.
All right, there's a couple of questions now because we're running out of time. Just on the Tories and reform. You had a meeting with Rupert Lowe. Are you accepting him into the Conservative Party, yes or no?
Look, I do know Rupert. We agree on many issues, including much to do with immigration, but that is not for me. He has to decide what his future is, and it's for Kemi as our leader to decide who is or isn't a member
But you'd
of
happily
the
have him in the
Conservative
fold?
It's not for me to decide that, Camilla.
Well, you must have an opinion as to whether you think he'd be a good Tory MP or not.
No, you're tempting me, but it isn't for me. It's for Kemi.
All right.
As our leader
how
to make
about
that
this
decision.
one for
But
you?
if I can say on reform, can I say on reform?
Very quickly. We're running out of time.
Look what's happened this week. Look what's happened this week. You've had, astonishingly, Nigel Farage getting into bed with Keir Starmer on hiking the welfare bill, spending £3.5 billion.
Still, you won't win your seat in Newark because of the rise of reform in your own patch. That's why you have been much more right-wing than they used to be, because you know you have to be Farage-ian to have any hope in hell of being re-elected.
Look, no, that's not true, Camilla. But look at the last week. You've had Farage getting into bed on welfare bed. I know Nigel Farage likes a pint or two, but it feels to me as if he had one too many before he announced that he was going to spend £3.5 billion extra on welfare. And then you've got Zia Youssef, the chairman of Reform, doing this wacky cryptocurrency policy in Las Vegas. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm all for innovation. But this is not the number one priority of my constituents in Newark. I don't think Reform have the answers to the challenges this country faces. That is what I'm focused on.
All right, but the trouble is that they seem to refer Farage to Kemi Badenoch, and according to a Survation poll this morning, 2/3 of Conservative voters would prefer Boris Johnson to be leading the party. So not Kemi Badenoch, and not even you, Robert Jenrick.
Well, look, Kemi Badenoch is the leader of our party. I'm right behind her. She's working hard to hold this government to account, and she's landing blows. Look what we've seen recently, where Labour have done this astonishing U-turn on the winter fuel payment, which was taking away money from some of the poorest pensioners in our society. That is what Kemi is doing. We know it's going to be a hard road ahead, but if we actually bring forward serious answers to the challenges this country faces, not get into bed with Keir Starmer on hiking welfare and taking thousands of pounds from savers and handing it to people so they can have their third, fourth and fifth child, I believe over time we can win back the trust and the confidence of the British public.
All right. Robert Jenrick, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.